it's Leela, the proud poly kinky queer slut. Today's question is age just a number? And this actually came from somebody who was flirting with me on a over message, and I thought this was cute. Um, age is age is not as important, in my opinion, as a lot of people think it is. Obviously, being of age, being not a child and able to consent is very important. But even with looking at like mental psychological development in my children, it strikes me that children are more adult than we give them credit for at an early age. But also, I do think that there are developmental levels that are roughly equated with age that continue throughout your entire life. So on the one hand, yeah, I mean, age isn't really so important, and I think a lot of people get hung up on age, and I see no problem with, for example, somebody who's 25 dating somebody who's 45 if they're compatible, if that's all working. But I do think that it is helpful to keep in mind that there are certain things that our brain does at certain stages in our life that are kind of typical, that kind of persist. Like right now, I'm at that middle age stage where my brain is having certain changes that are typical for people who are my age, in terms of how I think and how I approach stuff. And so somebody who is 25 is not necessarily going to have the same developmental outlook as somebody who's 45 now. But it's all individual. So it comes down to individual compatibilities in terms of what makes sense for age. Also, I think it's funny when you talk about like kink and age play and like all the pretend around that kind of stuff. You can absolutely pretend to be totally ages that you are not. You can pretend to be anything that you want to be. And there is some real value I have found in like just doing the mental exercise of saying, you know what if I were a 10-year-old brat right now? And, just letting myself embody that feels good. Also, going out and like similarly thinking like, what if I just let myself feel like an old woman today? What if I just let myself like act like I think I might be when I'm 80? What does that do with my brain? It's fun to play with that stuff for me. And just imagine what imagination is beautiful. Imagination is gorgeous. I love imagination, and daydreaming and experimenting with fantasies about things can really expand your brain. But ultimately, I do think that age doesn't matter so much as a lot of people think it does. I definitely don't think there is value in telling yourself that you're old, or in jokes like about how you're so old, especially if you're, in your 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, we're not old people. But I also just don't think that anybody really ever feels like they are old in the sense that a lot of those things mean, where you know, your life is valuable at whatever age you're at, and you still have plenty of life ahead of you at whatever age you're at, for the most part, until you actually get to a place where you're dying, and then it's an entirely different thing. So I have heard so many amazing stories about people who are starting new things in their 50s and 60s and even 70s that do amazing things to change the world. So yeah, it's never too late to start something new. It's never too late to move on to something new. And frankly, I think that like having a lot of age diversity in any group is really valuable because of just different life experiences and perspectives, and having been alive at different points in history, and having been conditioned as a child at different points in history, and being able to compare notes on that is really, really helpful. I mean, I love hanging out with my friends group where I have friends who are in their 20s, friends who are in their 30s, friends who are in their 40s, friends who are in their 50s, maybe a couple that are in their 60s as well, like all in the same, like around the same table. And then also with the kids running around who are, in their 10s and in their aughts, like, and just having all of those different perspectives in a conversation, or even just in camaraderie, is really, really nice and really good, I think, for sharing perspective about the world, and learning from each other, and gaining from each other's influence and experience. Because let me tell you, like, I've got some conditioning from being a child in the 80s and 90s that my friends who are in their 20s just do not have. And I've got unconscious biases that they just don't have. But I've also got lived life experience about how things were different and somewhat harder in ways that they don't. And so we learn from each other. And that's beautiful. So that's my take on age. Thanks very much for listening. And remember, you can ask me anything. Have a great day. Proud Polly Kinky Queer Slut is art. It is made for entertainment purposes only. I am not a subject matter expert on any of the topics discussed. Please do not rely on anything presented here as fact. Think for yourself, do your own research, make your own decisions. To submit a question, please email kinkyqueerslut@gmail.com.